Every morning for 50 years, Louise de Kiriline Lawrence walked the paths through her forest on the Mattawa River, watching the songbirds that arrived from their winter homes in Central and South America to breed in Northern Ontario. Louise was born in 1894, goddaughter of the Queen of Denmark and a debutante at the Swedish court. She was close to her father, a devoted conservationist, and she expected to inherit the family estate on the Baltic Sea. But when her father died suddenly, the land was sold for debts, and Louise was forced to move with her mother and her sister to a small apartment in Stockholm. Headstrong and principled, Louise trained as a Red Cross nurse as soon as the First World War erupted. She was posted to a Russian prisoner of war camp, where she fell in love with a white Russian officer, Gleb Nikolaevich. They married, and she followed him to Archangel, high in the Russian Arctic. When the White Russians were defeated by the Bolsheviks, Louise and Gleb joined 1,000 sleigh loads of refugees in a futile dash to Finland. They were captured and sent to a Moscow prison where Gleb vanished.
I simply couldn't believe that I wouldn't see him again. So I stayed on in Russia for 3 more years after, always hoping that I would be able to find out what had happened.
Louise and Gleb had dreamed of emigrating to Canada, a country much like Sweden and Russia. In 1926, she emigrated alone, landing in the village of Bondfield, east of North Bay, Ontario, where she set up a Red Cross outpost hospital, traveling to the sick by dog sled in winter and Model T Ford in summer. Among her patients were the Dionnes, who became famous as parents of the first quintuplets in the world to survive more than a day. As nurse in charge, Louise brought the babies through their first year, but the media circus around the quints was overwhelming. She bought a piece of forest on Pimisi Bay, had a log cabin built, and retreated into her wilderness. Today, the Trans-Canada Highway roars past Louise's forest, but when she bought the property, that road was just a survey line through the trees. She hired a local man, Len Lawrence, to finish the inside of the cabin and build her furniture. He stayed on, building a cabin of his own deeper in the woods, the foundation stones still visible today. Together, they started a poultry business with the hope that chickens and eggs would pay the bills, while Louise wrote a book about her year with the quints. Len and Louise grew close, and on September the 11th, 1939, the day after the Second World War was declared, they eloped. And Louise waved her second husband off to war.
When Len was overseas, my days were occupied from the early morning until late at night. And all was governed by my study of birds.
Slowly, with the help of books, Louise learned to tell a hairy woodpecker from a pileated, a white-crowned from a white-throated sparrow. She corresponded with expert bird scientists across North America and Europe, especially women like herself who were juggling domesticity and science. Women who helped change ornithology from a science that killed its subjects in order to analyze them to an observational study of how birds behaved. Every morning before dawn, Louise would slip her binoculars over her neck, tuck her bird count journal in one pocket, her bird guides in another, and grab her basket of mirrors so she could peer deep into the branches for nests. On rainy days, she'd pin a cushion to the hem of her coat, flipping it under her to sit on soggy stumps as she watched. She carried a sketchbook too, teaching herself to draw as a way of seeing more deeply into the lives of birds. Between 1942 and 1959, Louise operated the most northerly bird banding station in Ontario, slipping tiny aluminum bands around the ankles of 2,628 birds representing 50 species. She kept meticulous records of each one, the basis for her studies.
I remember especially I studied the nest of a great jay, and I would go there and sit there for the whole day. And it was a cold time because it snowed. I used to take lunch with me and blankets with me and sit there around that nest and take down notes on every move that those birds made. And I sat there for about 5 days and wrote it up in an ornithological journal. That was my first study.
Louise was the first to document the reproductive cycle of the Canada jay, now Canada's national bird. The first to record the life history of the yellow-bellied sapsucker. And she was the first to follow a red-eyed vireo and count the number of songs it sang in one day. An amazing 22,197, a dawn to dusk bird song count record that has never yet been broken. Over the next 40 years, Louise wrote more than 100 popular and scientific articles on birds and a shelf of influential books.
The quintuplets first year was one. The log house nest was the next. Then it was this monograph on the woodpeckers, on 4 species of woodpeckers, and The Lovely and the Wild.
The Lovely and the Wild, an intimate memoir of her life with birds, was awarded the 1969 John Burroughs Medal for the most distinguished book of natural history that year, the first Canadian woman to win this international prize. At the age of 83, she released the poignant story of her Russian odyssey, Another Winter, Another Spring. And at 86, her final book, To Whom the Wilderness Speaks. Louise died in the spring of 1992 at 98. But visitors still walk the winding path from the road to her log house nest, bathed in the sights and sounds and smells of nature. The ladder she climbed to smear peanut butter on a tree trunk for the red-breasted nuthatches still leans against the white pine, now grown tall. And Phoebes still nest outside her bedroom window, positioned so she could wake every morning with the sun in her face. Stoked with endless curiosity, Louise struggled to understand the birds around her. Through the late 1940s and early 1950s, she tracked the sharp decline in warblers and flycatchers and linked it to the roadside spraying of toxic chemicals, a decade before Rachel Carson's Silent Spring sounded the same alarm. Some call Louise de Kiriline Lawrence a Canadian Rachel Carson or a Canadian Thoreau. But unlike those iconic American nature writers, Louise was tucked in her northern Ontario woods, where she was hardly known outside a circle of local friends and international bird scientists. But that didn't matter to Louise.
Life is not just the moment when you live, which is a very short moment in the continuation of time. I can't see it just at the moment. I have to see the whole thing. I have to see the universe.
She would be pleased that scientists are finally proving experimentally the behaviors she observed, that the hoarding of chickadees is intentional, and that birdsong is language. And she would rejoice in the rise of citizen science, in the contribution amateur birders can make through apps like eBird. Most of all, she would welcome the shift in ornithological science that now looks at the world of birds as she did, from the bird's perspective, breaking down human assumptions of superiority, seeing birds and humans as two species sharing the natural world in harmonious association. The log house nest where Louise de Kiriline Lawrence studied birds for half a century still stands on the shore of Pimisi Bay, a testament to the self-trained amateur naturalist and writer who, through curiosity, devotion, and a stubbornly individual life, changed how we see the birds around us.
It has been a living that has been very profound and very thorough and very warm and very natural.